Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at something that's been making headlines lately. A recent article from the Globe and Mail. It really caught my attention, and it has to do with international students here in Canada. We hear so much about how Canada is trying to attract more and more international students, but this article, well, it shines a light on a different side of the story. It's about the ones who seem to be vanishing.
Vanishing. Well, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Officially, they're being reported as no-shows.
No shows, okay.
And the numbers are, well, they're pretty startling.
Nearly 50,000 in just 2 months, March and April of this year. It's like almost 7% of all international students in Canada. That's a huge number. What I found fascinating, though, is that Canada actually has this system, to keep tabs on these students to make sure they're going to class.
Right. It's called the International Student Compliance Regime,
Okay.
implemented back in 2014.
Oh, wow. So it's not new.
No, not at all. It essentially mandates that these designated learning institutions, they have to report on the enrollment and attendance of their international students.
So these students can't just, slip under the radar,
Not easily, no. The system's designed to ensure they're actually showing up for classes.
which makes these no-show numbers even more, I don't know, intriguing, suspicious.
Intriguing, for sure. The article highlights how the rates, they vary quite a bit depending on the student's home country.
Yeah, and then that's what really jumped out at me. Like Rwanda, for instance, had a no-show rate of, get this, 48.1%. That's 802 students. Even the Philippines, which had a much lower rate, 2.2%, still had 688 students unaccounted for.
And then there's China. A huge number of students come from China. 4,279 no-shows. That's about 6.4% of their students in Canada.
And of course, India. I mean, we can't talk about this without mentioning India. Almost 20,000 students, 5.4% of their total, reported as non-compliant. But what I found especially interesting about India is this whole investigation that's going on right now.
Right. The Indian authorities, they're looking into possible links between the Canadian colleges that are accepting these students and organizations in India that are suspected of involvement in something pretty serious, human smuggling across the Canada-U.S. border.
That's heavy stuff.
No.
So we're not just talking about students skipping class or dropping out here. This is raising the possibility that some might be using these study permits as a way to get into Canada.
A way to get it, yes, with the intention of then crossing illegally into the U.S.
Wow. It's like something you'd see in a movie.
Yeah.
But is that the only explanation? I mean, are all these missing students really sneaking across the border?
It's a good question. Illegal border crossings, they are a very real concern. But, the article also quotes this former federal economist who suggests something else, that a lot of these no-shows, and particularly those from India, are likely still in Canada, working illegally, under the radar. They're hoping to eventually get permanent residency.
Okay, so there could be multiple things happening here. Some students might be involved in these illegal border crossings, while others are trying to find a way to stay in Canada through other means. But this brings up another question. What is Canada doing to address this whole situation? I mean, they have this tracking system in place.
Well, they've definitely been taking steps to tighten things up. Back in November 2024, Canada's immigration minister introduced some stricter regulations. Schools that don't properly report on their international students can now face a ban. They could be banned from accepting new international students for, get this, up to a year.
A whole year.
Whole year.
That's a pretty significant consequence. It's a big deal. But the article also, it pointed out some potential discrepancies in the data. There are differences between figures from Statistics Canada and the Immigration Department.
Yes.
Could this mean the issue's even bigger than we initially thought?
It's definitely possible. Those inconsistencies, they suggest that even with the tracking system, there might be even more students unaccounted for than the official numbers are showing.
This is where the opinions of the people who are actually dealing with this on the ground have become so valuable. The article included some interesting perspectives. For example, there's this conservative critic who was quoted, and he straight up blamed the government, saying they've totally mismanaged the entire immigration system and haven't been paying enough attention to this issue.
Right.
But then you have this immigration lawyer who offered a completely different take. He suggested that it's not necessarily the students themselves who are the masterminds behind these schemes. Instead, he pointed the finger at, foreign agents, consultants who might be taking advantage of the system for their own profit.
He even proposed a solution, a potential solution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he suggested requiring applicants to only work with regulated Canadian lawyers and consultants.
So you've got this finger pointing going on, but what's clear is that there's this whole complex web of factors at play here. And it seems like ultimately it's the students who are getting caught in the middle.
Unfortunately, yes. It's a very complex situation.
It really is.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada wants to attract these international students, but also has to make sure its immigration system isn't being taken advantage of.
Right.
And let's be honest, trying to track thousands of students across a country as big as Canada, it's a massive undertaking.
It's like herding cats, except these cats are scattered across the entire country.
Mm.
And they can vanish at any time.
Yeah.
But seriously, I mean, even with a good system in place, I can understand why there might be discrepancies.
Exactly. And not every no-show is a case of, intentional deception. There are plenty of legitimate reasons why a student might not show up in the data.
Yeah, like life happens. They might switch programs, transfer to a different school, maybe something comes up in their personal life, and they have to put their studies on hold.
Absolutely. And the system might not be able to keep up with those changes, in real time. So
Right.
a student could still be here in Canada studying, but they're classified as a no-show simply because the records haven't been updated yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. But on the other hand, we can't forget about the possibility of exploitation. The article, it mentioned these possible links to human smuggling networks.
Yes, it did. And that's a serious issue.
Very serious.
Human smuggling is just one form of exploitation that these students can be vulnerable to. They're in a new country, often unfamiliar with the laws. Maybe they don't speak the language well, and they really want to stay here, get their immigration status sorted out.
Mm.
It can make them easy targets for people who want to take advantage of them.
So we could be talking about situations where students are being forced to work in unsafe conditions, or they're being pressured to pay these huge fees to agents or consultants who make all these promises, but, well, don't deliver.
Exactly. And because a lot of this happens, in secret, it's really hard to know the full extent of it, let alone try to fix it.
It's heartbreaking, really.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, if Canada is encouraging all these international students to come here, shouldn't there be more, I don't know, safeguards in place?
It's a tough balance. Canada definitely benefits economically from international students, but there's also a moral obligation to protect them. We have to make sure they're not being taken advantage of.
Yeah, we can't just treat them like dollar signs. They're people with their own dreams and goals. They contribute so much to our society.
That's right. And that brings us to, I think, a really important point. We need to approach this whole issue with what I like to call informed skepticism.
Informed skepticism. I like how that sounds. What exactly do you mean?
Well, it's about being critical thinkers. It's about not just accepting everything we read or hear, but digging a little deeper, questioning things, looking for evidence.
So not just assuming that every no-show is a case of someone trying to do something wrong.
Exactly. There could be, and often are, perfectly valid explanations, as we've been talking about. But at the same time, we can't just dismiss the possibility that something shady is going on. It's about looking at all sides of the story with a critical eye.
Okay, I get it. So how can we apply this informed skepticism to this specific case?
Well, for starters, we need to pay attention to where the information was coming from. Who's presenting the data? Do they have a particular agenda or bias?
And even if the source seems credible, we still need to think about the context. Is the information being presented in a way that could be misleading or, sensationalized?
Right. And probably the most important thing is to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong. We might have to revise our understanding as new information comes to light. Be willing to consider other explanations.
This all makes a lot of sense. But how do we, as, just everyday people, develop this informed skepticism? I mean,
Yeah.
it feels like we're constantly bombarded with information from all directions these days.
It definitely takes practice, and it can be overwhelming. But a good place to start is by, diversifying your information sources. Don't just rely on one news outlet or social media feed. Seek out different perspectives, compare them, contrast them, and ask yourself, what's missing from this story? What am I not seeing?
That's great advice. And I think it applies to how we approach information in general, not just this specific case.
I agree. Informed skepticism is a valuable tool for navigating just about everything these days, especially with so much information out there.
So, okay, let's apply that lens of informed skepticism to the role of the media in shaping public perception of this whole no-show issue. I mean, the article we're talking about, it does seem to play up the drama a little,
Yeah.
focusing on these big numbers of missing students and implying that there's all this abuse going on.
That's a fair point, and it highlights a bigger issue. The media, they tend to focus on stories that are sensational, the ones that are going to get people's attention and make them react emotionally.
So all the focus on the negative stuff might overshadow the positive contributions that international students made to Canada.
Absolutely. We rarely hear stories about the thousands of students who successfully finish their studies, who contribute to the economy, who enrich our communities. Instead, a lot of the narrative revolves around potential threats, like their strain on resources, their competition for jobs. Some people even see them as security risks.
It's like it creates this distorted image, doesn't it? It reinforces negative stereotypes and makes it harder for international students to, well, to feel like they belong, like they're welcome here.
It does, and it can undermine public support for policies that encourage international education and immigration, which, in the long run, hurts Canada.
So it's up to us as, people who consume media to be discerning, to be critical. Look beyond the headlines, read between the lines. Ask ourselves what the motivations might be behind the stories we're being told.
And seek out stories that show the positive side, the positive contributions of international students. We need to challenge those negative stereotypes whenever we see them.
Because in the end, it's through informed and compassionate dialogue, real conversation, that we can create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone.
Now, let's dive into some of the specific challenges that these international students face here in Canada. The article touched on a few, but I think it's important to, really explore them in more depth.
One that comes to mind immediately is the cost of education. International students, they often pay a lot more for tuition than Canadian students do.
Well, it's a significant financial burden for many of them. Some students might have the resources, but many others, they have to rely on scholarships or part-time jobs or maybe financial help from their families. And that pressure, that financial pressure, can make it really hard to concentrate on their studies.
And then there's the issue of finding a place to live, affordable housing, especially in the big cities. That's a challenge for everyone, but it's especially tough for international students.
Yes, definitely. And let's face it, they often face discrimination from landlords who might be hesitant to rent to them because they're new to the country.
It's a catch-22, isn't it? They need a local address to get a visa or open a bank account, but they can't find a place to live without already having those things.
Exactly. And even when they do find a place, they might end up living in, well, overcrowded conditions or places that aren't really suitable.
Yeah.
And that can affect their health, their well-being, their ability to study.
And then there's the whole social aspect. Moving to a new country, away from your family and friends, that's a huge adjustment for anyone. International students often struggle with loneliness, homesickness. It's tough.
And if they don't speak the language fluently, it can make it even harder to connect with other students, their professors, people in the community. It's a lot to deal with on top of everything else.
It's easy to forget about all of that when we're just looking at these no-show numbers. It's important to remember that there are real people behind those statistics.
Yes, absolutely. And it underscores the need for more support, more resources, specifically designed for international students.
We need to see them as valuable members of our communities, not just, sources of income for schools.
That's a crucial shift in perspective. And it's not just about practical support. It's about creating an environment where they feel welcome, where they feel respected, where they feel like they belong.
Okay, so with all these challenges in mind, what are some potential solutions to the no-show issue itself? I mean, the article talked about stricter regulations for schools, but are there other things that could be done?
Definitely. I mean, strengthening oversight of these institutions is a good first step. Things like requiring more robust tracking systems, regular check-ins with the students, making sure schools report any concerns they have to immigration authorities, all of those could help.
So it sounds like we need to hold the schools more accountable for their international students. But what about the agents and consultants? That seemed to be a big problem.
Absolutely. Cracking down on the ones who are exploiting students is crucial. We need tighter regulations, stricter penalties for fraudulent activities, and we need to make sure students know their rights, how to get help if they're being taken advantage of.
So it's about making the system fair and transparent for everyone. But as you mentioned before, some students might be turning to these alternative pathways because they're desperate. Maybe they're facing economic hardship back home or political instability.
That's an important point. Addressing those root causes, that's a much bigger and more complicated challenge, but it's essential if we want to create a fairer global system.
So we need to support developing countries, help them create jobs and economic opportunities, and advocate for human rights and democracy around the world.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted approach. It requires cooperation on an international level and a real commitment to tackling those underlying factors that drive people to migrate through irregular channels.
Okay, but what about the students who are legitimately looking for an education in Canada and who want to stay afterwards? Are there other options for them?
There are, definitely. We need to explore alternative pathways for these students to immigrate to Canada legally. We could expand existing programs, like the post-graduation work permit program, or create new ones that recognize their skills and contributions.
So instead of forcing them into these risky, potentially exploitative situations, we give them clear and legal ways to build a life in Canada.
Exactly. It's about attracting global talent and helping them thrive here, while also making sure our immigration system is both effective and ethical.
It sounds like there's no single solution, no magic bullet. We need a multi-pronged approach that tackles both the symptoms and the root
I
causes.
agree. It's a complex problem that needs a holistic solution. Everyone needs to be involved: government agencies, schools, students themselves, even the broader Canadian public. We need to work together on this.
Yeah, we need to move past the blame game and partisan politics and actually find solutions that benefit everyone.
Speaking of collaboration, let's not forget about international partnerships. Those are key to addressing this issue.
You're right, this isn't just a Canadian problem, it's a global one. We need to be working with other countries, sharing information, coordinating our efforts, finding solutions that work on an international scale.
Imagine if we could improve communication and cooperation between countries. We could potentially identify and disrupt these human smuggling networks. We could track student movements more effectively. We could even start to address those root causes we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we're all connected in this globalized world, so the solutions have to be global too. We can't just focus on what's happening within our own borders.
Exactly. And this collaboration, it should go beyond just government agencies. Think about universities and colleges in different countries working together, sharing what they've learned, creating support systems for international students that go beyond national boundaries.
It's about building a global network of support, a sense of community, making sure these students feel welcome and valued wherever they choose to study.
Now let's shift gears a bit and think about the bigger picture. How does this issue affect Canada's immigration policies overall?
It's pretty clear that the influx of international students has been good for Canada. They contribute to our economy, our culture, they bring new perspectives.
Absolutely.
But, as we've been discussing, there are challenges too. And this no-show phenomenon, it shows that we need a more nuanced and flexible approach to immigration policy.
I agree.
We can't just keep doing things the way we've always done them. We have to be open to learning from what's happening, adapting to new situations, and constantly asking ourselves, are our policies working? Are they serving both Canada and the newcomers who come here?
It's about finding the right balance. We want to attract talented people from around the world, benefit from their contributions, but we also have to make sure the system is fair and that it works the way it's supposed to.
And we have to do it in a way that reflects our values, inclusion, compassion, respect for human dignity.
Absolutely. It's about people's lives, not just numbers and statistics. Our policies need to reflect that.
One question that keeps coming back to me is, well, how do we balance attracting international students with protecting the integrity of the immigration system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But one approach could be to shift our focus. Instead of just trying to get as many international students as possible, maybe we should concentrate on attracting the right students, the ones who are genuinely interested in studying here and contributing to Canada in the long term.
So quality over quantity.
Exactly. We need to find students who are more likely to stay in Canada after they graduate, build careers here, become part of the community.
It's about recognizing that international students can be a real asset to Canada, not just a temporary source of income for schools.
That's right. And it's about creating a system that's attractive to talented people from all over the world, while also being fair to the people who are already living here.
Another question is, well, how do we make sure that international students are treated fairly and ethically once they get here?
Yeah, we've talked about the challenges they face: exploitation, discrimination, isolation. We need to do more to address those things.
We need stronger laws and better enforcement to protect them from exploitation. We need to tackle systemic bias and promote understanding between cultures to combat discrimination. And we need to create better support systems to help them integrate and succeed.
It's not enough to just welcome them to Canada. We have to actively help them succeed.
And their success becomes our success, right? When international students thrive, Canada thrives.
Now let's zoom out even further and think about Canada's place in the world. How do our immigration policies impact other countries?
That's an important question. Are we attracting students from developing countries who could be helping their own communities? Are we creating a brain drain?
These are important ethical questions. We can't just think about our own needs. We have to consider the impact on the rest of the world.
One thing we could do is invest in educational partnerships with developing countries. Help them build up their own universities and create opportunities for their students to study abroad without having to emigrate permanently.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's about creating a more balanced and reciprocal relationship where knowledge and skills flow in both directions.
And it's recognizing that global development is not a zero-sum game. When other countries do well, Canada benefits too.
Exactly. A more interconnected and prosperous world is better for everyone.
So as we try to figure all of this out, as we search for solutions, it's important to remember that there are no easy answers.
Immigration policy is complicated. It involves so many factors: the economy, social issues, humanitarian concerns, and finding the right path forward requires dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt and change as we learn more.
But one thing's for sure, we can't just ignore these issues. How we manage international student mobility has a huge impact, not just on Canada, but on the whole world.
And as we navigate these challenges, we always have to remember that we're talking about real people, not just statistics.
Every single one of those no-show numbers represents a person with their own hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And how we approach this issue needs to reflect that.
We need to make sure our policies and actions are rooted in compassion, empathy, a real desire to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
That's a powerful way to put it. It's not just about fixing a broken system. It's about building a better future for everyone.
And that future depends on us being willing to engage with these tough issues, to have those difficult conversations, and to work together to find solutions that are both effective and ethical.
So much to think about. I mean, we've talked about the no-show phenomenon, the potential for exploitation, the need for skepticism, informed skepticism, the whole global picture. But as we wrap things up here, I keep wondering, what does all of this mean for Canada? For Canada's image on the world stage?
Yeah, that's an important question. Canada's built this reputation, as a welcoming and inclusive country, a place where people can come from all over the world and feel safe, build a good life.
Our universities are well respected globally, and we always score high in those quality of life rankings.
But if we don't manage our immigration system properly, if we don't protect international students, if we look the other way when things are going wrong, well, that reputation takes a hit.
It's like prospective students might start having second thoughts about coming here. I mean, we could see fewer applications, especially from those really talented students that we're trying to attract.
And it's not just about attracting talent. It's about living up to our values, fairness, justice, being inclusive. If our words don't match our actions, well, it makes people question whether they can trust us.
It's like saying one thing and doing another. That kind of inconsistency, it erodes trust. And these days, in this globalized world, trust is more important than ever.
That's right. Canada has a chance to be a leader, to show other countries how to do immigration right. But to do that, we have to acknowledge the problems, fix what's broken, and be willing to talk about what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, and those conversations, they have to involve everyone, the policymakers, the educators, community organizations, and the students themselves. It's going to take collaboration, creative thinking, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes.
And as we move forward, we can't forget that we're talking about real people, not just numbers on a page.
Right. Each one of those no-show cases, it represents a person, someone with hopes and dreams and their own unique story. And the way we approach this issue, it needs to reflect that.
We need to make sure that everything we do is based on compassion, empathy, a real desire to create a world where everyone has a chance to succeed.
I like that. It's not just about fixing a system. It's about building a better future for Canada and for the whole world.
And to get there, we need to engage with these issues, have those tough conversations, and work together to find solutions that are effective and ethical.
Well, we've certainly explored a lot in this deep dive. We've looked at this no-show situation from all sides. We've talked about the challenges, the possible solutions, and I think we've asked some pretty big questions about Canada's place in the world.
And hopefully, our listeners, you've come away with some new insights, new things to think about.
Remember, informed skepticism, it's important. Keep asking questions. Be curious. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Because it's that kind of active engagement, that willingness to get involved, that can help us create a better world, a fairer world, a more welcoming world for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another interesting topic to explore. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.